Welcome to Let's Talk About It with Amy Schreiber, where we talk about life's journey, the real estate market, and everything in between. My name is Amy Schreiber. I am your host, and I am a local realtor in the state of Florida, servicing the Tampa Bay area. I am joined by my co host, Katie Easling. So, Katie, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about your next steps up the corporate ladder after leaving the uniform company, having a miscarriage, and just the toxicity of the environment there pushing you into the next chapter of your journey.
Yeah, it's amazing how you put that, right? I never realized until we started really deep diving that every change I've made, and we'll touch on that throughout, but every change I've made has been because of some form of toxicity, right? That I've experienced. But yeah, so, after a short period of time, I think it was maybe a few weeks or so after I had, lost my son, I decided to make the change, as I said last week. And, you know, I was able to do that. And I think everything happens for a reason. Timing is amazing as well. Um, I received a call from someone I had worked with at the uniform manufacturing company who had left and was working for a quick service restaurant in the purchasing world. And that's something that I was interested in. And there was an opportunity in that company, it was a local company, to be in the purchasing department. So I interviewed and I got the job. And like I said, within a short period of time, I was now in a new role, right? So as I was climbing that ladder, I had the uniform manufacturing company that was amazing to start and kick off. And then moving into this new world of fast food and the corporate office was definitely a big change. But I think as we move through our careers, there are the skills that we learn from one job to the next are transferable, most of them, right? Maybe all, but definitely most of them. And you continue to build on those, right? And grow. So this next position really gave me an opportunity to gain more confidence, gain more knowledge on various skill sets I had learned previously. And yeah, would definitely, I think I would end up being there for about 5 or 6 years. Again, another 5 or 6 years under my belt. But I think it's important to also note prior to leaving, I had graduated with my associates with honors. So that was, an amazing time for me, as I had said. And I took some time off before going back to get my bachelor's. So obviously, I moved to Checkers in the purchasing world. I was an inventory specialist, which basically meant I was managing inventory, managing food cost, which I had never done before. So again, goes back to that element of always learning more. Even though I did a subset of it before, I was able to learn more in a different industry. And what's really interesting is it exposed me to more of the business side of things when it comes to the fun side, right? I was working with vendors and had the opportunity to go to dinners, really nice dinners, and really start to grow as a professional, right? And adapting, as I had mentioned previously, to different personality types and different levels of the organization. So, I mean, that was totally different and something I hadn't yet experienced. And it was amazing, right? And, I was able to build really good relationships internally in our department because I worked, for the director of purchasing with the buyers, and also the vendors and our distribution centers that I worked closely with in order to ensure that we had sufficient inventory for, normal menu items and our limited time offer menu items, that special sauces, special menu items, stuff like that. So it was really an interesting time. Yeah. And then a couple years in, I had the opportunity to get promoted, and it was to purchasing analyst. So I was even working closer with the buyers, with the vendors, and understanding the contracts and pricing and negotiation. So again, that's kind of where I started my negotiation experience, right? And helping build that knowledge while then making a decision that I was going to go back to college and I was gonna work towards my bachelor's degree, and and they ended up paying for it as well. So that was, obviously amazing. And yeah, I would major in international business. This wasn't a global organization, but I had always envisioned of working for a global
Yep.
company. So, it just seemed like the right fit at the time. And it was a good time. I was learning a lot and growing as a professional.
Awesome. So we've heard a little bit about what corporate life was like. Last episode, we touched a little bit on your son's seizures, how they were continuing to get worse. Tell us a little bit about what was happening at home during this time.
Right. Yeah. So during this time, his seizures were still, ongoing. And, most of the time he would end up in the hospital, as I'd mentioned before, maybe I didn't. And it would be a 2-day, 3-day thing, right? In the ICU and then, in the regular hospital room and then check out. So, all while working and climbing up that ladder, right? And now deciding to go back to school. I just felt like I guess I could take on the world, which again, you put your mind to something and you make a plan, you should be able to do it. But yeah, so oh gosh, I was recently promoted, and I think probably a year later, that's when, and it was about, I would say, a year and a half before I ended up leaving the organization, or maybe a year. I've been doing great things. I've just been promoted. Even though he would have a seizure, we'd be in the hospital, I'd be working hard. I'd be putting in my time, at least 40 hours a week, if not, 50-ish. And I remember sitting at my review. Every year you get a review, an annual review, and it was great. And my manager was, you're doing a great job, blah, blah. And it ended with, and I don't remember exactly, but the feeling obviously is remembered because I take that with me, right? And she had mentioned, um, spending a lot of time away from the office. Now, I do want to retract that my position was, I was able to work remote, right? And that's, at the hospital or at the home office or what have you. And shortly before the review, my son, it was probably a couple months, my son had one of the worst seizures he's ever had. Um, he was 10, yeah, at this time. And he was at school, standing in line, and he fell and had a seizure. And, they took him to the hospital. Normally they could stop the seizure with, a drug. And unfortunately they couldn't. So this particular local hospital that did have a children's hospital ended up flying him via helicopter to a Tampa hospital. And that was scary.
Yes.
He had never been flown to another hospital. They would just watch him, they would release him in 2 or 3 days, as I mentioned. But this one was worse. This one was a grand mal seizure. Typically, he would seize on the left. This one, grand mal, you seize, I mean, everywhere, your full body. And so that was so scary. I remember obviously getting there as soon as I could, right as soon as I found out. And so that's when the neurologist had said, because all throughout like that last year, we were trying to get him approved for the brain surgery. There was a brain surgery that was potentially 70%, 80% uh, preventative, right? Or, would work, right? And he would stop having seizures potentially, or the seizures would lessen. So finally, after this particular episode, while he was in the hospital, they said he's been approved for the brain surgery, and which was amazing. You know, that's something that we really wanted to do. There was a lot of risk involved, but at the end of the day, he was getting older, right? And it was really impacting him. So
Yeah.
finally, shortly after that, we had brain surgery over the Thanksgiving holiday. Monday check in and he was out Wednesday. It was great. I mean, you know, nothing but a swollen face and his eyes, you know, black and blue, but he would end up not having seizures for 10 years after that, which was amazing, right?
It's
They
incredible.
would start up later on, but um, so that was prior to my review, a couple months prior. So going back to my review with my manager, it ended with, you know, I really think you should spend a little bit more time in the office. And, you know, I know you're going through a lot, but hopefully now, you know, everything will get back to normal. And there's no normal. And I think so that was like, okay, I get it. I now need to focus on figuring out what my next step is because
Yeah.
you have just killed me,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I have been putting in 40 plus hours a week, even Thanksgiving while he was having his brain surgery. I had my laptop on my lap doing work all throughout that week. And you're still telling me I'm not giving you enough? I'm getting everything done. I am meeting my deliverables. I just had a great review. And now you're saying I still want more from you? Um, I'll tell you, I couldn't. That was the last straw. And that's when I knew I needed to change and make a plan and figure out where is Amy going now.
That's a great point. I mean, that's such a lack of empathy that she had. That's just sort of showing you that your position in that company to her was very much just a cog and not a human being who was going through, you know, an incredibly difficult time of your life, life changing. And so I think that that's a great point, that that's where you can kind of identify this is toxic. I am not being seen. I am not being valued. I'm not being appreciated despite all my hard work, because we know how committed you are. We know how hard you work at everything that you put your mind to. So yeah, can you just tell us a little bit more about like your thoughts and what kind of drives you? What is your threshold in these companies where you're like, no, this is enough. This is toxic enough. I need to
I
move forward for mine.
No, I think that's a great point because I think a lot of us, we just take it up to a certain point, right? And I think my point has always been actually when it gets to a point where I'm questioning who I am, I'm questioning my value. When you're questioning um, something that is personal, right? The miscarriage, obviously, that wasn't the question, but that was the end result. And then this with I'm not giving enough, but yet I am, right? But it's not enough just because I have a child with a disability. I think when it comes to the point where I can no longer, like my values can no longer supporting you, right? Because you're my manager and I have to support you. And if I can't support you, and if I am going to be negative, and if I am going to eventually get fired, because
Right?
you know you've driven me there and I didn't make that change, then that's when I know, obviously well in advance because I haven't gotten fired, but that's when I know I need to make a change. So when I feel it in my heart, and I think it's got to be a big thing, right? It's got to be a big thing to drive me to a change. And that's what we've experienced as we're digging into, my story, right? And so I think the important thing here is if you are in a toxic environment, you may not be able to get out quickly. It may take you some time. I think it took me about a year to leave, right? Because I had to plan my escape. I can't just leave. I'm the breadwinner, right? It's all on my shoulders. So it was imperative that I made my plan. And like I said, it took about a year. Just, you got to plan. But I'll tell you, it is so important to walk away when you are not getting what you need, what you deserve. Um, there is a point for all of us where that tolerating that behavior ends, and it ends when you make me question who I am, what my values are, and you impact my personal life in some way.
Mental health, it causes you to question anything about your values, then it's time.
It is. It
Well,
is
thank you.
absolutely. So, yeah. So next week we are going to get into my longest stint at one job in my corporate career, and that's with JP Morgan, and that'll probably be a few episodes. But yeah, I'm looking forward to next week's conversation.
I can't wait to hear it. Thank you so much for sharing.